All right. Welcome everybody to our webinar today, where we're going to talk about how we can bridge the AI agent governance gap, how you can go from policy to practice. My name is Kevin Shavinsky. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Modulus. Modulus has developed an AI governance platform that helps organizations manage, deploy, and oversee AI systems in a new world of AI regulations that touch all parts of our businesses. And I'm immensely privileged to be joined today by Vin Sharma, who's the founder and CEO of Vigil. Uh, Vin, would you like to say a few words about Vigil and about yourself?
Thanks, Kevin. It's great to be here. It's great to speak with all of you. My name is Vin Sharma. I'm the founder and CEO of Vigil. Vigil is a trustworthy AI agents company. We help organizations, enterprises, small and large, build agents that they can trust in mission critical roles, particularly in regulated industries where reliability, security, and safety of the agents are key requirements and blockers to adoption and deployment.
Great, thank you, Vin. I'm going to walk us briefly through our agenda today, and then we're going to get into the core of the scenario we're going to go through today. And so it's really all about how in a practical sense, organizations can manage their AI agents. We have more and more of them in our organizations. They take over more and more critical functions, and that means the risks that they expose us to increase. And at the same time, the regulatory scrutiny and also the scrutiny, let's be honest, of customers becomes more intense. And so we need the tools to oversee, manage, and secure agents all the way from a piece of legislation like the EU AI Act, all the way down to the code level, the technical level. And so, very briefly, what is the challenge? What is the difficulty? It's this gap between governance and what really happens at the guardrail level. Um, it's easy to write a lot of policies. It's easy to implement a bunch of tools down at the runtime level. But connecting those and making sure you close the loop can be a challenge because every company has its own AI stack. The technology moves extremely fast. And the regulations in many cases are actually not that clear on what they really demand, and they were written in many cases before agent systems were really something that was considered. So a lot of them are written with the classical machine learning paradigm in mind, but that doesn't matter. They apply to our systems today. And so we're going to walk you through now a scenario of securing such an agent. And so throughout this scenario, we're going to show you how the integration between Modulus as the governance platform on one side and Vigil as the operations platform on the other can help you close that loop. So we're going to start with an example of an AI agent that might well be already in your business, or you might think about it, or maybe your employees are building it. And that's an HR agent that scores CVs. We get a lot of job applications these days, and it's very tempting to quickly whip up an agent that takes those incoming CVs and scores them. Now, that's a high-risk AI system under the EU AI Act. So that's something that's covered by regulations and that exposes you to risks and gives you certain obligations. And so I'm showing you a screenshot of the Modulus platform. This is where you would start tracking that AI system, that CV scoring agent. And as you go into the AI Act, as an example, you have Article 15, which is represented by a requirement on our platform that tells you that the AI system must have accuracy, robustness, and cybersecurity. This is all very loosely defined in the AI Act. We're going to get more details from the harmonized standards, but you have an obligation to track whether that CV scoring agent meets those requirements. And so let's focus in specifically on a control that maps to the EU AI Act, or it might map to some other framework that you're implementing. And that's all about whether you have effective model bias prevention and mitigation. There's two words there, prevention and mitigation. What can you do to understand and mitigate the bias of your CV scoring agent? On our platform, you have a control with an owner, and guidance and evidence and associated policies that track whether you're effectively doing this. So you'll have this control for the CV scoring agent, and you'll have it for the 50 or 100 or 1,000 other agents that you might also be in the process of deploying. And so now you say, okay, what's going on in this agent? Is it biased? Probably yes, every agent at some level is biased. How bad is it? And you can guesstimate that, or you can rely on some quick command line tests, or you can use a real agent evaluation suite. And so I hand over to Vin, who's going to tell you all about how Vigil handles the evaluation of agents.
Thanks, Kevin. So let's jump right into it. Look, you could vibe test your AI agent or AI system, and it's not going to get you the evidence that you need to be able to justify and defend that in first a deployment in production, and secondly, with auditors that would look very closely at the mechanisms and the metrics that you're using to assure that it is reliable, secure, and safe. So as an alternative to vibe testing, we see a lot of companies building their own hand-cobbled, artisanal, if you will, evaluation test frameworks. Fundamentally, where we see a lot of the failures for that type of an approach tend to be the lack of a very systematic approach to the rigor of testing, what to test for and how to test for it, and the scale at which you could do that testing. It works well enough on a laptop within a very limited context for one or two agents or one or two AI systems or applications. But as soon as you start to see an organization at a certain scale deploying agents, you need a platform. And so a platform has to have some fundamental components here, an engine that can execute the tests themselves, the harnesses, if you will, around those that engine that allows you to probe the agent's properties in various ways, the results of the testing, and ideally an explanation of those results. So it's not just a score, but an explanation of how the score was derived and computed, and the actual standards and um, processes by which that was constructed. So what you need really is the rigor and process behind constructing these test harnesses. The engine itself looks like a distributed system, could run at scale, but the heart of how we at Vigil have come to this is to ask, what does it mean to have a trustworthy AI agent? And we think it's fundamentally based on three properties: reliability, security, and safety. It's the ability for the agent to do what it's expected to do correctly and consistently under varying conditions, to continue to do that correctly, even under hostile conditions when it is under attack, hence cybersecurity. And if and when it fails, and it will most certainly fail at some point under certain conditions, that the blast radius of damage, the scope of failure, if you will, is contained, and there are explanations, there's transparency on why it succeeded or failed. And that to us is fundamentally how we see these core aspects of an AI agent, and it feeds in to the requirements that compliance frameworks typically have. Now, the three things that make this unique to your organization and to your agent is that, unlike benchmarks, static frameworks that you might download from the web, or common paper-driven standards that you might see, we want to be able to test an agent in its target environment. So essentially, it needs to be bespoke, and it needs to be um, tuned to the purpose of the agent, the personas of the users that would interact with it, and the policies of the organization, including the regulatory policies. And so you have to be able to derive the test harnesses based on those very unique characteristics of your agent in your target environment. So Kevin, if you go to the next slide, we'll dive into what makes the Vigil approach unique and different from any one of those test environments or test engines that you might have seen, both in the marketplace or something that you might build for yourself. First, it's just to focus on what we test for. So unlike most eval engines that test primarily for the ability of the model or the agent, we're testing for reliability, security, and safety. It's not just the quality of the output of the agent or the AI system, but also how correct and how consistent is that quality over time under repeated conditions. And that to me is an important factor that's missed frequently. So when you look at the trust, it really needs to be unpacked in a strict principled taxonomy, and we've done that on behalf of our customers, and this helps them get going with the testing really quickly and save a lot of time. Second, you see a lot of black box testing where it's really just, agnostic to the agent, does not understand what's inside the AI system and treats it essentially as a black box. And a lot of cybersecurity vendors would come to you from that point of view that this is just yet another asset class within the organization. We've done these kinds of tests before, so we're just going to check the inputs and the outputs and test those. That's certainly a good place to start. It's a perimeter defense approach to this process. But what you really want is to be able to understand the unique characteristics of an AI system and what makes an AI system different from other types of applications. And it's the non-determinism. It's the fact that you don't necessarily get the same output when you feed it the same input. So the gray box, the components of the system make a difference. And ideally, you really want to be able to have access to the source code of the agent and the application to be able to test it. And you don't often get the access to the source code of the model, but you certainly can see the harness around the model affecting the trustworthiness, the reliability, security, safety. And so you want to be able to test for that. So we do all three levels of depth in the testing, and I think it's an important distinction. Second, how do you test this? And you'll see again approaches that focus on a single prompt response, like a stimulus response pair, but really increasingly agents are not just chatbots, but full-fledged conversational agents as well as functional work bots. They actually do consequential, they take decisions like the screening agent that Kevin spoke of earlier, the HR agent that screens CVs, is making a consequential decision and taking an action that affects real world um, uh, conditions. And it does that in a multi-turn, stage by stage, state sensitive process. And you will have to be able to have a test engine that does that too. And finally, I mentioned the bespoke part of it. It is a large part of how you need to be able to construct test cases. Most organizations kind of build a golden data set with correct responses to the test questions, but they quickly become stale and static, and you want to be able to keep them fresh. So we do that on behalf of our customers by generating these test cases and versioning them and making sure that they're replayable. So there's consistency and repeatability to those test cases. And you can run these test cases and this engine as part of your process, not just during development, just plug it into your CI/CD process. And so every time your agent or your AI system is updated at any one of its components, you simply rerun the test, takes 5 minutes, just get a score, make sure that it's not regressing, but also do this in a sustained, systematic, continuous hours of operation way, just on the cusp of deployment into production. So you have verification and validation, you have AppSec reviews and operational readiness reviews, and you prepare for an audit with your compliance team. And this we think is really critical. So having a single platform that does all of these aspects of evaluation to serve multiple needs and presents these results back into the modulo system that gives you a comprehensive view of this agent as it is being built and deployed and operated is a critical feature of our solution. And doing it yourself versus having the benefit of having this done for you really is a very clear value. Kevin, back to you.
I love the term vibe testing. It sounds like the kind of thing that we might do and think is good enough, but in our modern environments, it's probably not such a good idea. So what we can do, and so we've already integrated the two platforms together, we get the output from such an agent evaluation that Vin just described, which is a detailed analysis of how the agent reacts. So now the question is, what kind of risk exposure does this agent cause? And that question, of course, depends not just on the agent, but also the context of your organization. What is your business? How is the agent really being used? And that feeds all the way into your risk management system, which certainly under the AI Act you should be operating, which the NIST AI risk management framework describes. And the core of risk management is to say, basically, what are the risks that we have? In this case, we've already identified as model bias. Um, and how bad is it? And so we can take the result of an evaluation from Vigil and put it into our risk management system. Now, our approach at Modulus to risk management is to move away from 5 by 5 risk matrices, where we decide that the impact is high and the likelihood is medium, and then we discuss which shade of orange the cell should be, and we move to quantifying risks in monetary terms. Because you can still be wrong about the monetary risk from an AI agent being biased, but when you put a currency number against it, we can have a grounded debate. I can say, look, I believe it's this much, and you say, are you mad? It's much less than that. And then we can have a productive discussion and figure out something closer to the truth. Now, on our platform, on Modulus, we track those risks broken down by a configurable risk taxonomy, and then you can schedule those risk runs. You can basically say every week or every month or whatever the right cadence for your system is, go get the Vigil output in this case, and risk score the agent. Of course, this is a little bit self-referential here because we, of course, use an agent system of our own to make those estimates. And so we use a Fermi methodology based on everything you've connected to govern this agent. Vigil, your source code, your observability, your policies, your documentation to try and estimate what the risk exposure really is. And you can always read up on how our Fermi agent makes that estimate. What's the raw exposure and how much have you mitigated? And in this case, the exposure is pretty serious. It's over 3 million euros. And so you could now have the basis for making a risk management decision. So it depends on what your business is, whether 3 million euros is a risk exposure you're willing to accept, or whether this is something you should mitigate. I'm going to come down on here on we should probably try to mitigate that. That's a lot of exposure from just one threat vector. So let's see what we can do about it. So the decision now is made as part of the AI governance process, the risk management process. That's too high. Let's go do something about it. And that's where the loop continues. So you go back to Vigil and say, what technology solutions can we employ to lower the risk of this agent, specifically the risk of model bias? So back to Vigil, back to Vin. How can I help mitigate the risk from my agent?
As one of my favorite philosophers said, if it's not enough to interpret the world, you have to be able to change it. And in this case, we do need to be able to mitigate the risk with controls that you can enforce, not just at the discretion of the operator or the agent developer, but because they're systemic and organizational, to be able to enforce them in a mandatory way, to be able to build those in, ideally by design, into the agent itself. Now, if possible, we would want to build these in directly into the model too. And certainly the model developers at the frontier models are doing a ton of work in exactly that area, but it's necessary, not sufficient. You have to be able to then do a similar kind of scale of thinking and enforcement at the level of the harness that surrounds the model and builds up the agent. And a large part of that involves being able to trace the identity of the agent and use that identity to enforce controls over its behavior. And that's fundamentally how we're thinking about the DOME module within our platform that allows you to deploy this agent with these controls built into it or inside the harness and plug it into the modular system so that when it does enforce those controls, it is at the same time observable, and the benefits or the effect of those controls is immediately visible within the modulus framework and can show the mitigation of risk as it's computed. And Kevin will speak about that in a second. But diving a little bit into the details of how Dome is constructed, fundamentally what we're trying to do is make sure that the agent has an identity that is distinct from the user who owns or operates or develops it. And so while they are connected, the user's identity should not mean that the privileges of the user automatically are inherited by the agent because the agent may not need all of those privileges. So if you kind of took this least privilege model, then you only need the privileges that the agent only needs the privileges it needs to do a particular task for the duration of the task and no more and no less. And so we do that. We also work on converting the policies, and in this case, whether they're organization policies or, as Kevin was alluding to, the broader compliance framework. A large part of the integration that Vigil and Modulos have is to be able to lower this from governance to guardrails in a systematic way and make sure that there's as little uncertainty as possible in that conversion from the policy level or the governance level to the guardrail level. And that's where the controls start to materialize. We have very well defined standards-based approaches to understanding how an action that an agent could take would be allowed or denied or steered in a certain way, and certainly observed in terms of logging and warning that the operator could do. But there are multiple ways in which we detect what would represent policy violations. It could be certainly cybersecurity threats external to the agent, like prompt injections and jailbreaks. It could be outputs from the agent that would be considered toxic or biased, and could simply start with content moderation. But more interestingly and more significantly, you really want to be able to take the policy of the organization and the industry in which the organization is situated and lower it into a specific rule or control and have that be detected, the violation of the policy or compliance with the policy be detected with every input, process, or tool call within the agent and output that the agent does. And so that to us is where we're both as Modulos and Vigil together pushing the envelope of what a governance and a control framework is capable of doing today with AI agents. But we think that this is where the heart of the most difficult challenge sits. And we're really excited about helping our customers solve that rather than have it to do it themselves. The configuration of Dome is relatively straightforward. We offer this as an open source library that you could import into your agent. So there's full transparency into how the agent is being governed or controlled at that level. What really makes this effective is that in process, the agent specific, agent resident mechanism talks to the control plane that where your policies sit. So you as the GRC and the AI risk organization, the governance team, define the policies centrally, host them for your organization at the platform level, but are able to push them down into every agent in the organization so that they're controlled in that deterministic fashion together. So with that, on the next slide, I'll show you a quick view of what this looks like. One side of it is just the control where you set up the inputs and the outputs and the guardrails around it. And the other side is the visibility that you get back into the system in terms of what was detected and what was blocked and what was allowed or steered through the process. And what you're seeing here is a set of benchmarks that we ran to compare these guardrails, the ones that we're building, against others in the industry. There are really three benchmarks or metrics that I'd like you to pay attention to when you evaluate guardrails. First, how accurate are they, and how comprehensive are they, and how much of a latency do they add to the process itself. And so if you have good metrics for those three, and those are the three that we consider, we believe that Vigil's Dome has the most comprehensive coverage of factors, inputs, tool calls, function calls, and outputs, the most highest accuracy that we've tested on publicly available guardrails. and the lowest latency because we take advantage of the hardware capabilities, the GPU or the ASIC, and pull those performance capabilities up into the guardrail layer so that you have as little friction as we can muster in the process, even as you have guardrails and controls over your agent behavior. So with that, the key thing here is that the what we control and what we detect uh, has traces, and we pass those traces back into the Modulos platform so it has full visibility into how those policies were in fact enforced at every agent in the organization, and you maintain a single pane of glass over the entire agent fleet within your organization with the controls that you've just established. So with that, Kevin, back to you.
So now that we've implemented our risk mitigation technique, the guardrail, the dome, to make sure that the agent is mitigated in terms of the risk of bias, we can go back to the platform and we can run our Fermi agent again and say, well, what does the risk look like now? Did our exposure go down? And in this case, the exposure did go down because the Vigil Dome guardrail effectively reduced the risk of a bias event that would cause a risk exposure from this particular agent. And so this is one loop, right? We basically went from one agent, we took the one article from the EU AI Act, we took one specific control that is mapped to that article, we looked at the risk, we quantified it, we measured it in a Vigil Evaluate, we had risk exposure that was unacceptable. And so we said, we need to manage this risk. We need to do something about it. So we went back, we implemented a technical measure, which in this case was the dome. We went back and remeasured, and the risk from this particular threat vector has now been decreased significantly. Now we could say here, okay, we're happy, we're done, and nothing could be further from the truth. This is a loop, right? This has to happen continuously, right? You have to continuously evaluate whether your technical mitigation is effective, that your risk exposure is below what you would like it to be or what you require it to be, and that you can trace that all the way back to your regulatory requirements. So you can operate the system with a minimized risk to your reputation, minimized risk to fines, or even market exclusion. And so you need to run this loop continuously. So you can schedule the risk quantification on the side of Modulus to happen at the right cadence for your system. And you do this not just for this particular threat vector of model bias. You could do this for a number of threat vectors. Maybe in your risk taxonomy, you have 50 threat vectors, or you have 100. And then you have potentially hundreds of agents in production, and that requires automation. And the combination, the integrated combination of Modulus and Vigil lets you build that, right? Building this for one system, for one threat vector, and vibe coding it is possible. Doing this at scale is a whole nother challenge. And that's what we're here for. That's why we very early identified the opportunity of integrating our two platforms. And that's what we help our customers with. Uh, Taking them all the way from, oh, our agent is high risk under the AI Act, all the way down to the technical mitigation and intervention at the guardrail level, and not just connecting that once, but connecting it in a repeatable loop that will alert you when something goes wrong. And so with that, we've come to our reflections on what we covered here. I would say I'll say a few words here, and then Vin, please jump in. I think the most difficult thing with governing agents is that it spans such a large range. It goes from a legal text that might be difficult to interpret to organizational measures, to individual technical measures on an agent, to live operations on an agent in production and back. That requires a multidisciplinary team in your organization, that requires expertise, and it requires tooling that can cover that entire range. Vin, what do you think about this challenge?
So one of the things that we really want to emphasize is the empathy that we have for somebody in your role. If you are responsible for governance of AI systems in your organization, you have an unenviable challenge. It's difficult. It's an ambiguous environment. It's changing really rapidly. And what you need fundamentally, what we've noticed is first executive mandate or some kind of organizational support for the work that you're doing. And we think that that's really critical because sort of ground uh, uh, efforts with point projects and point solutions often don't scale at the organization level, and you really need the organizational mandate. Second, you have to have the evidence to back up the value of this focus on governance and trustworthiness. And we've noticed that often this is either an afterthought, as security has been in the past, or it's often seen as a friction. It's that gap between the time that the agent developer has built an agent that they're delighted and proud of, and the time it takes for them to deploy it into production with these controls, with the governance, with the AppSec review and the operational readiness review. And that is considered friction. It's a process that delays. But it doesn't have to be. And part of the reason why the Modulos Vigil platform is so effective is because it takes that friction away and reduces the time it takes to take an agent from prototype or good enough to production, where it is verifiable and validated with frameworks and controls that you can trace back to with real evidence that's measured from the agent in production. So we think that that's a really important benefit. So think of the one metric that Modulos and Vigil offer you as an optimization is time to trust. It's the time it takes for you to trust an agent in production. And we think that that's really critical. And finally, you could certainly do it yourself. Kevin said this before too. At a certain scale, you absolutely must begin to do this yourself because then you'll appreciate the complexity and the difficulty of doing this right at scale. And it's really when we, as the Visual Modulos platform, can step in to help you get to that next point and you understand the burden that we're carrying on your behalf. So with that, we're happy to take questions.
So we're live not just on LinkedIn, we're also live on YouTube. And Simona, do you have some questions from the audience for us?
I don't see any questions here. I just wanted to ask a question to you both is what makes you decide that the two platforms could provide more value together, right? So what was really the mechanism, the driver for it? And I ask this to both of you.
So for me, the key driver is that the term AI governance has become extremely broad, and different people mean very different things by it. And at the same time, the need for AI governance is increasing rapidly now, both from market pressures and from regulatory pressures. And so in order to implement an effective AI governance in an organization deploying agents and AI systems at scale, requires technical tools that span a huge range. And there isn't one set of tools or one integrated vendor that really can supply it all, claims notwithstanding, because there's so many different disciplines in it. And so the way we saw to complement what we do well and what we have chosen not to do because we see it as not inside the mission of Modulus, is to integrate with the leading companies in the world that complement us. And that's led us to find a Vigil, connect with them, and build an integration so that we can serve both of our customers with our combined capabilities.
It was exactly the same logic we came to as well. We wanted to focus on things that we could get good at, in fact, to be world class at, to focus on things that we enjoy doing because of our backgrounds and our skills and our competencies as a team, as an organization at Vigil, and where we see ourselves delivering the most value to our customers, both individually and jointly. And so when we put those together, it was clear that we are AI systems people. My background is 10 years of building AI systems at AWS and before that at Intel with BMW. I understand the complexity of the systems building process and what it takes to launch AI applications and AI services, and a lot of what and how we did this at AWS and the AI organization is how we're seeing this being reframed and really democratized, if you will, so that any enterprise, any organization, whether it is running on AWS or not, is able to take advantage of the same processes and methods and mechanisms for governing and for controlling and operating reliable AI systems. Where we don't have competencies is in the policy layer, is in understanding the complexity and the ambiguity of governance as a process that requires an orchestration and a framework of understanding across the organization. And that's exactly what Modulos offers at scale. And tying the two together just meant that it was so much easier for us to be able to serve the needs of a governance and regulatory compliance team within large enterprises that need this capability, but need the evidence to be collected as automatically as possible with as much rigor and discipline as is required for compliance. So with that, this looked like a match made in heaven.
Can only echo and support what Vin said. It's been a really fascinating event. If there's no last minute question, I would like to thank you all for joining us. And you can, of course, watch the recording soon. We'll distribute that link to our audience and make it available. And so with that, I wish you a successful early start into the weekend.